The champagne flute trembled slightly in Martin Whitmore's hand as he cleared his throat. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel fell silent. Candlelight danced across crystal centerpieces, reflecting in the eyes of 200 wedding guests. The band had stopped mid-melody, forks hovered above plates, and every head turned toward the groom's father, my husband of 30 years, expecting a toast to our son, Daniel. Instead, his voice rang out steady and sharp. "I've decided to start a new life. Without you, Elena." Gasps scattered through the room like shattered glass. I felt every gaze swing toward me, a collective holding of breath. Daniel froze at the head table, his new bride's hand tightening around his. Across the room, Chloe Harrington, 35, all blonde hair and calculated charm, sat with people I once called friends. The faintest smile curved her lips before she caught herself. Everyone waited for the scene they thought they'd get. Tears, screaming, a woman undone. Instead, I reached into my clutch, slid out a cream-colored envelope, and placed it on the table in front of Martin. I didn't look at him. For later, I said calmly, my voice steady, despite the ice sliding down my spine. From the corner of my vision, I saw Daniel's expression twist in confusion, then alarm. My hands stayed still on the linen tablecloth nails, pressing crescent moons into my palms. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my son's life. And yet, here we were, his father, turning it into a public spectacle. 3 months earlier, I might have been blindsided. I might have clung to the edge of this moment, flailing for an explanation. But not tonight. Tonight, every step, every word had been rehearsed in my mind 100 times over. The first clue had been a bank notification, an automatic alert for a $4,800 transfer to an account I didn't recognize. I'd been the one managing our household finances for decades, so even the smallest irregularities stood out. At first, I told myself it was a mistake, a one-time anomaly. But then came another, and another, always just under the threshold that would trigger certain bank flags. The thing about living with someone for 30 years is you know their rhythms. Martin had always been careless with the little things, misplacing car keys, leaving half-empty coffee cups around the house, but meticulous with appearances. And lately, those appearances had grown elaborate. New tailored suits, weekend business trips to Charleston, the subtle scent of cologne he never used to wear. One Saturday morning, he left his phone on the kitchen counter while he took a call outside. The screen lit up with a text preview. "Can't wait for after the wedding. Our place will be perfect." The contact name was Charlie H., but I'd known Chloe Harrington for years. She'd sat at my table for Thanksgiving once. She'd asked me for career advice over cappuccinos. That was the morning I stopped waiting for my marriage to right itself. Martin didn't know about the prenuptial agreement we'd signed 3 decades ago when my father insisted on protecting my inheritance. He thought it was long expired. It wasn't. Buried in its legalese was a fidelity clause, still valid, still enforceable, that shifted the balance entirely in my favor if he strayed. I hired a discreet attorney. We built a case quietly. I traced the money trail, printing statements, highlighting transfers, logging dates. I found the rental application for a coastal villa, his signature alongside Chloe's. I found jewelry receipts, weekend hotel bills, and thanks to his carelessness, an email thread planning a dramatic post-wedding announcement. They'd chosen Daniel's wedding for maximum humiliation. A public setting Chloe had written means she won't make a scene. They didn't understand me at all. Back in the ballroom, the hum of whispered speculation rose like static. Martin's brow furrowed at the envelope resting by his plate, his fingers brushing its edge. "Please," I said, standing smoothly. My silk gown whispered against the carpet. "Let's enjoy the rest of this evening for Daniel and Claire." And with that, I walked away from the head table. The crystal chandelier above caught the silver in my hair, the movement of my dress, but not the pounding of my heart. I kept my back straight, my chin high as I crossed the room. By the time I reached the double doors, the applause for the band had resumed a weak, awkward attempt to restore normalcy. I stepped into the cool evening air, my pulse beginning to slow. I had just left my husband holding an envelope that would dismantle his carefully built future before it even began. 3 months before the wedding, my mornings had fallen into an unsettling pattern. I'd sit at the kitchen island with my coffee staring at the steam curling from the mug and feel a quiet dread settle over me. Not the kind of dread that explodes, it seeps in slow and deliberate like water creeping under a locked door. It began with that $400 or $800 transfer. The alert had buzzed on my phone while I was folding laundry. I'd paused holding one of Daniel's old college t-shirts, my thumb hovering over the notification. The account number wasn't familiar. The payment memo simply read, consultation fee. We hadn't hired a consultant in years. I called the bank. The woman on the line was polite but guarded. She confirmed the transfer was authorized by Martin. Then she hesitated just long enough for me to understand there was more she wasn't saying. When the second transfer came $5,100 to the same account, I knew. I didn't have proof of what, but my gut had been honed by decades of balancing our books, running our home, raising our son. This wasn't normal. One rainy Tuesday, Martin left for an overnight conference in Charleston. I opened his desk drawer, knowing exactly where he kept his receipts. He was tidy to the point of predictability. A folder labeled Travel 2024 sat in plain view. I flipped it open. Hotel bill. 2 nights at the Palmetto House, one of the most romantic waterfront hotels in Charleston. A receipt from an upscale jewelry store for a diamond tennis bracelet. My stomach turned when I saw the engraving for our forever. Her name wasn't on the receipt, but the next sheet made her real. A printed email thread. Chloe, after Daniel's wedding, will be free. I want us to walk into our place by the coast and never look back. Martin agreed. Public setting for the news keeps things civil. She won't cause a scene. I sat there, gripping the paper, the sound of the rain outside like static in my ears. I could have screamed. I could have called him, demanded answers. But the part of me that had survived 30 years of marriage knew better. My father had been a cautious man. Before he passed, he'd insisted Martin and I sign a prenuptial agreement. At the time, it had felt unnecessary, almost insulting. But I'd agreed, tucking the document into a safe deposit box and never thinking about it again. Until that night. I drove to the bank the next morning. The clerk unlocked the box, sliding the familiar leather folder toward me. There it was, dated, notarized, legally binding, and on page 7 in black and white. In the event of infidelity, the non-offending spouse shall retain primary rights to all jointly held assets as well as 70% of marital property. My hands shook not from fear, but from something far sharper, power. I called Amelia Rhodes, a discreet divorce attorney recommended by a friend I trusted. Her office was in a nondescript building downtown, the kind of place where no one asked questions about why you were there. I don't want a confrontation, I told her in our first meeting. I want leverage, and I want it ready before he knows I suspect anything. She leaned back in her chair, assessing me. Then we'll build your case quietly. Financial records, correspondence, proof of cohabitation plans with someone else. The prenup will do the rest. Over the next 6 weeks, we worked like shadows. Amelia subpoenaed bank records through legal channels. I photographed receipts and printed email threads. A private investigator followed Martin on one of his golf trips, returning with photos of him and Chloe walking hand in hand down a marina pier, their faces tilted toward each other in a way that needed no explanation. The villa sealed it. In late April, I found the rental contract in Martin's briefcase. A 3-year lease on a coastal property starting the Monday after Daniel's wedding. Both their signatures inked in bold, my name conspicuously absent. I held that document in my hands and felt an unexpected calm. This wasn't a man about to betray me. This was a man who had already done it over and over while assuming I'd never notice or never have the courage to act. Amelia drafted the divorce petition and the motion for a financial freeze. The trick, she said, is timing. We file after the wedding, but before he can move or hide assets. That envelope you give him will be the detonation point. I'd thought about that moment often, how his face might fall, how Chloe's painted smile might falter. But the fantasy wasn't about revenge for its own sake. It was about reclaiming the narrative. For too long, Martin had been the one with control. That envelope would change the balance in one breath. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I played my part flawlessly. I helped Daniel choose flowers, tasted cake samples with Claire, even smiled at Martin over dinner. If he noticed the change in my eyes, he didn't mention it. Chloe and I crossed paths once at a bridal shower Claire hosted. She greeted me like we were old friends, leaning in with a conspiratorial warmth that made my skin crawl. I smiled back every inch the gracious hostess. She had no idea I already held her future in my filing cabinet. The night before the wedding, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. My phone buzzed with a late-night text from Daniel. "Thanks for everything, Mom. Tomorrow's going to be perfect." Perfect. I typed back a heart emoji and turned the phone face down. Tomorrow would be perfect for him. For me, it would be the day I walked away from 30 years of deception with my head high and my future intact. The morning broke warm and cloudless sunlight streaming through my bedroom window in wide golden ribbons. The kind of morning you'd want for a wedding, bright, gentle, unmarred. I lay still for a moment, listening to the muffled stirrings in the house. Daniel's groomsmen were already downstairs, their voices carrying faintly through the floorboards, bursts of laughter, mixing with the faint hiss of the coffee maker. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, my bare feet meeting the cool wood floor. My suitcase sat open at the foot, half packed with what I'd need for the reception, and later for the short trip I'd booked for myself. By this time tomorrow, I'd be on a plane to Santa Fe, far from the coastline where Martin thought he'd be starting his forever. The dress I'd chosen for the ceremony was folded neatly in a garment bag, navy silk, understated, but elegant with a soft shimmer when it caught the light. Not too showy. Not so plain it suggested defeat. I wanted to look like the woman who had been at the center of this family for 3 decades because I was. By 9, I was in the kitchen, coffee in hand, when Martin walked in. He was in his tuxedo pants and a crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. "You're up early," he said, reaching for the French press. "I could say the same for you," I replied lightly. He gave a little shrug, pouring himself coffee. "Big day for our boy." "Our boy?" I repeated softly, watching him. His tone was light, but there was something else there. A flicker of distraction, maybe even restlessness. Chloe's text, perhaps. I wondered if he had any inkling that by sundown, the ground beneath him would shift in a way he couldn't control. The church was already buzzing when I arrived. Guests milled about the vestibule, exchanging hugs, admiring the flowers, ivory roses with touches of pale blue hydrangea. The air was filled with the faint scent of eucalyptus, woven into the arrangements along the pews. I spotted Chloe almost immediately. She stood in the corner of the vestibule, chatting animatedly with one of Claire's bridesmaids. Her dress was a shade of champagne that caught the light with every movement. And there, it was the diamond tennis bracelet glinting on her wrist. For our forever. Her eyes met mine across the room. She smiled warmly, as if there were no secret tether between her and my husband, no coastal villa with their names on the lease. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Claire walked down the aisle, radiant, her father Martin by her side. I watched them from the front pew, my hands folded over the program in my lap. Martin glanced at me once during the vows, a quick, unreadable look. I held his gaze for half a second, then turned back to my son and his new wife. Daniel's voice caught when he said "I do," and I felt my eyes sting. No matter what else this day was, it was his day first. I refused to let my personal war stain it. The reception was held in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont, all-white tablecloths and glittering chandeliers. String lights hung over the dance floor, casting a warm glow that made everything look a little more magical. I kept close to Daniel and Claire for the first part of the evening, posing for photos, toasting with champagne, laughing at the best man's speech. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Martin and Chloe weaving through the crowd, always together, always with that subtle gravity between them. It was during the father of the groom speech that I knew the moment was coming. Martin took the microphone, standing just a few feet from where I sat. His voice was smooth, practiced, like a man used to holding a room. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," he began. "This is not just a celebration of love, but of new beginnings." He looked straight at me, and speaking of new beginnings, a ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. My fingers tightened around the envelope resting in my lap. "I've made a personal decision," Martin continued, "one that will surprise some of you, but I believe in honesty." He gestured toward Chloe, who stepped forward slightly, her eyes shining. "After today, Chloe and I will be starting a new chapter together." The air seemed to thin, a collective intake of breath. Somewhere in the back, a glass clinked against a table. I rose slowly, my chair scraping the polished floor. My voice was steady when I said, "Martin, I have something for you as well." I crossed the room, heels clicking softly, and placed the thick, red-sealed envelope into his hand. "A little gift for your new chapter." He frowned clearly, thrown off script. "What is this?" "Open it," I said, stepping back. The seal cracked with a dry snap. He pulled out the first page, his eyes scanning quickly, then slower. The color drained from his face. "What the hell is this?" he barked. Chloe leaned toward him, peering at the paper. Her smile faltered. I clasped my hands in front of me. That I said evenly is a petition for divorce, along with a motion to freeze all marital accounts. You'll find the attached exhibits enlightening. The room had gone silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Martin's voice rose sharp and unrestrained. "You can't." "Oh, I cut in. It's all legal. You see, our prenuptial agreement has a very specific clause about infidelity. You remember, don't you?" The tension was almost tangible, pressing in from every side. Guests exchanged bewildered glances. Someone at the back whispered, "Oh my God!" Chloe stepped back, her face flushing. Martin's hand trembled slightly as he held the papers. I turned toward Daniel and Claire, whose expressions were a mix of shock and confusion. My voice softened. "This doesn't change today for you. Enjoy your wedding. You've earned it." Then I faced Martin one last time. "You wanted a public setting. Here it is." Without another word, I walked off the dance floor, my heels echoing like punctuation marks on polished marble. The ballroom doors closed behind me with a soft thud, muffling the swell of voices that had risen like a wave in my wake. I could still feel the heat of every eye on me, the silent gasps, the way conversation fractured into hurried whispers. My hands were steady, but my pulse was a drumbeat in my ears. I didn't head straight for the exit. Instead, I walked down the corridor, lined with framed black and white photographs of the city's early days, horse-drawn carriages, fishing boats, women in long skirts and wide-brimmed hats. Their sepia smiles seemed to follow me, as though they too understood the satisfaction of reclaiming one's power. I stopped near a tall, arched window and looked out at the marina below. Sunlight caught the ripples on the water, turning them into shifting shards of silver. Boats bobbed gently in their berths, oblivious to the storm unraveling above them. A sharp click of heels approached from behind. Margaret Chloe's voice called softly, almost a plea. I turned slowly, taking in the sight of her still immaculate, though her champagne-colored dress seemed somehow duller in the hallway light. Her diamond bracelet glimmered faintly, a reminder of everything Martin thought he could keep hidden. "What do you want, Chloe?" I asked, my tone neutral. She hesitated, wringing her hands. "I didn't want it to happen like this. I care about Daniel and Claire. I never wanted to. To what, humiliate me, break up my marriage." Her eyes widened as if she hadn't expected me to say it so plainly. "It wasn't about you," she said quietly. I gave a small, humorless laugh. "Of course it was about me. You can tell yourself whatever you need to sleep at night, but don't pretend you didn't know exactly what you were doing." For a moment, she looked as though she might say more. Then she shook her head, muttered something under her breath, and walked away. I stayed by the window for another minute, collecting myself before heading toward the side exit. I had no intention of returning to the reception, not tonight, not ever. Daniel would find me later. I trusted he would understand in time. As I reached the coat check, I caught sight of Detective Alvarez leaning casually against the wall. She straightened when she saw me. "Nicely timed," she said under her breath, a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Did you get what you needed?" I asked. She tapped her phone. Loud and clear. His outburst, the way he confirmed parts of what you alleged, it's all on record. My colleague's still inside keeping an eye just in case he does something stupid. "That's almost a guarantee," I murmured. By the time I stepped out into the late afternoon air, the sun was dipping toward the horizon, casting long, honey-colored shadows across the street. The hum of traffic and the faint strains of music spilling from the open ballroom windows felt strangely far away, as though I'd already crossed into a different life. I pulled my phone from my clutch and dialed. "Harper." Her voice was immediate bright. "Is it done?" "It's done. I've got a table at Lamar, just like we planned. We'll toast to new beginnings." I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in my shoulders begin to unwind. Save me a seat. When I arrived at the restaurant 20 minutes later, Harper was already there, a glass of Sauvignon Blanc in hand. She rose to hug me, holding me a moment longer than usual. "You look like someone who just won a war," she said. "Maybe just a battle," I replied. "The war's still on." We ordered seafood and bread with herbed butter, the kind of comfort food that felt decadent after the austerity of the past few months. Between bites, I told her about Martin's reaction, Chloe's attempt at a half apology, and Detective Alvarez's satisfied smirk. Harper listened occasionally, shaking her head or letting out a low whistle. "I'm proud of you," she said finally. "Most people would have either blown up months ago or let it fester for years. You handled it like a strategist." I smiled faintly. I guess I had a good teacher. Halfway through dessert, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. "Daniel, Mom, are you okay?" I hesitated before replying. "Me? I'm fine. We'll talk tomorrow. Enjoy your night with Claire." 3 dots appeared, then vanished. No follow-up. I knew he was probably reeling, trying to reconcile the father he knew with the man exposed today. That was his journey to take, and I wouldn't rush him through it. When I got home later that evening, the house felt different. Not emptier. Martin hadn't lived there for weeks, but lighter somehow. I walked into the kitchen, set my clutch on the counter, and opened the back door. The night air was cool and fragrant with the scent of blooming jasmine. I stood there for a long while, listening to the crickets, feeling the faint hum of possibility in my chest. The fight wasn't over. There would be lawyers, depositions, perhaps more public scenes. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Today had shifted the balance, and I knew I had the stamina to see it through. Somewhere in the quiet, I thought I heard the faintest sound of laughter, my own from a version of me that existed before Martin's betrayals. She was still there, and she was coming back. 2 days later, the summons landed like a stone in my mailbox, a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing Martin's attorney's letterhead. I didn't need to open it to know what it was: his counterattack. Inside, the words were cold and clinical. Petition for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences. That and a laundry list of financial demands so audacious I had to read them twice. He wanted half the house, half my retirement, even a share of the small art studio I'd built for myself in the backyard, my sanctuary. I placed the papers on the kitchen table, poured myself a cup of coffee, and called my lawyer, Vanessa. "Let me guess," she said after I read the first paragraph aloud. "He's trying to scare you into settling." "He'll be disappointed," I replied. Vanessa's tone was brisk, businesslike. "We'll respond with our own petition and include the evidence of his misconduct. Given his financial disclosures, well, the ones we've seen, he's going to have a hard time convincing a judge he's entitled to anything beyond the legal minimum." "Do it," I said, "and make sure the art studio is off limits." "Already ahead of you." Later that afternoon, I met with Detective Alvarez at a small cafe near the courthouse. She slid a manila folder across the table. "Surveillance from the marina. You can clearly see him meeting with that consultant he claimed was a business associate. And here, she flipped open a page. Bank transfers to an account in her name. This isn't just infidelity, it's financial misconduct. Judges don't like that. I studied the grainy stills, the timestamp in the corner of each frame. Martin's hand on Chloe's back, his head bent close to hers. His easy smile. "Thank you," I said quietly. "You've got more leverage than most people in your position," Alvarez said. "Use it wisely." That evening, I found myself in the backyard, hands buried in soil as I replanted the small row of lavender I'd neglected during the chaos. The repetitive motion was grounding, the earthy scent calming. Yet beneath that calm, I felt the steady hum of anger, not the wild, uncontrolled fury from the early days, but something sharper, more deliberate. Martin wanted a war. Fine. I knew how to fight without losing myself. 3 days later, I saw him again, this time at the courthouse, for our preliminary hearing. He arrived with Chloe on his arm, as if flaunting her presence would unsettle me. I didn't give him the satisfaction. Vanessa and I stood outside the courtroom reviewing our notes when Martin sauntered over. "Still playing the victim, Maggie," he sneered, his voice pitched just low enough for the others not to hear. I met his gaze, my own voice steady. "Still pretending you're the hero, Martin." His jaw tightened. Chloe tugged at his sleeve, murmuring something. He stepped back, but his eyes stayed locked on mine until the bailiff called us in. Inside, the judge was a silver-haired woman with a sharp gaze that missed nothing. She listened as Vanessa outlined Martin's financial dealings, presenting the preliminary evidence Alvarez had gathered. Martin's attorney objected at every turn, but the judge allowed most of it into the record. When Martin took the stand, he tried to paint himself as a misunderstood provider, claiming my emotional withdrawal had driven him toward companionship elsewhere. Vanessa let him talk himself into corners before quietly producing the bank transfer records. The judge's expression shifted just slightly as she reviewed them. By the end of the hearing, Martin's request for a share of my retirement was denied, and the art studio was declared separate property. Small victories, but they tasted sweet. Afterward, Harper met me at the courthouse steps with 2 lattes. "You didn't just hold your own in there," she said. "You ran circles around him." "It was Vanessa who ran circles," I corrected. "Sure," Harper said with a grin, "but you kept your composure. That's half the battle." That night, I sat at my desk and began writing not legal notes, not strategy lists, but something for myself. Pages and pages of the things I'd kept bottled up for months the first time I noticed Martin pulling away the hollow ache of pretending we were fine for the children's sake, the way betrayal feels like an amputation you have to learn to live without. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. And for the first time since the unraveling began, I felt like I was reclaiming my own voice. The next morning brought another twist. An email from Daniel, short but loaded. "Mom, I need to talk. Can we meet tonight?" I replied immediately, "Of course. Dinner at the house." He arrived just after sunset, looking older. Somehow, his tie loosened and his expression guarded. We ate in near silence until he finally set down his fork. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he admitted. "Dad says you've been planning this for years, that you're just trying to ruin him." I met his eyes. "Daniel, if I wanted to ruin your father, I would have done it a long time ago. What I'm doing now is protecting what's mine and making sure the truth is heard." He looked away, wrestling with his own thoughts. I need time." "You'll have it," I said softly, "but don't wait too long to see who's really telling the truth." After he left, I stood at the kitchen window, watching his taillights fade down the street. The war Martin had started was spilling into the lives of everyone around us, but I refused to let him write the ending. I still had pieces to move, alliances to solidify, and one last card I hadn't yet played. The last card sat in a small fireproof box under my bed, a copy of the deed to a lakeside cabin Martin had purchased 3 years ago. He'd put it in his brother's name, probably thinking it would stay hidden. But a stray receipt stuffed carelessly in his desk drawer had led me right to it. The cabin wasn't just a getaway, it was where he'd been meeting Chloe long before anyone knew about her. And worse, the purchase had been made using funds from a joint investment account. That meant I had a legal claim. Vanessa's eyes lit up when I showed her the papers. "This," she said, "tapping the deed isn't just leverage. This is a game changer." He'll either have to buy you out or give it up entirely. A week later, we filed a motion to include the cabin in the marital assets. The look on Martin's face when he got served was worth every sleepless night I'd spent gathering evidence. That Friday, I drove to the cabin myself just to see it. Late autumn leaves swirled across the dirt road leading to the property. It was quiet, almost serene, until I remembered whose hands had held me here once, and whose arms had wrapped around someone else afterward. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and was met with the faint scent of cedar mixed with something floral, her perfume lingering in the wood. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to walk through each room. The stone fireplace, the wide windows opening onto the lake, the unmade bed. This wasn't just a building. It was a monument to his betrayal, and soon it would either be mine or gone from his reach forever. That night, Harper came over with a bottle of wine. We sat on my porch wrapped in blankets, watching the stars. "You think he'll cave?" she asked. "He'll fight," I said, "but this tips the scales." Harper studied me for a moment. "You're not just winning this for yourself, are you? You're making sure no one else gets trampled by him again." I took a sip of wine, considering. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just finally standing up for me. 2 days later, Daniel called again. This time, there was no hesitation in his voice. "I want to see that evidence you have," he said. "If Dad's lying, I need to know." We met at a diner halfway between my house and his apartment. I slid the photos across the table, Martin and Chloe at the marina, the bank transfers, and finally the cabin deed. Daniel's eyes scanned each page, his jaw tightening. "He told me this place was an investment property," Daniel said. "Said it was empty most of the time." "It wasn't," I replied softly. For a long moment, he just sat there, shoulders heavy. I believed him because I wanted to, but I can't unsee this. The next hearing came faster than expected. Martin's attorney pushed for mediation, clearly hoping to avoid another public dressing down. But Vanessa insisted on proceeding, knowing the cabin motion gave us the upper hand. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Martin cornered me again. "You think you've won?" he said through clenched teeth. "You've destroyed this family." I met his stare evenly. "No, Martin, you did that the day you chose her over us." His nostrils flared, but before he could respond, the bailiff called us in. The session was brutal. Vanessa presented the cabin evidence, first linking it directly to our joint funds. Martin's attorney stammered through objections, but the judge overruled most of them. Then came the photographs, the transfers, the timeline of his visits. When it was over, the judge's decision was clear: the cabin would be included in the marital assets. And given the circumstances, its full value would weigh heavily in the settlement. Martin's face went pale. Chloe, sitting 2 rows back, shifted uncomfortably. That evening, Daniel showed up at my door. No warning, no text, just him standing there with his hands in his jacket pockets. "I'm sorry," he said, "for doubting you." My throat tightened. "I know this hasn't been easy for you. I hate seeing you like this. But I also see now you're not the one tearing things apart. You're holding them together the best you can." We hugged for a long time, the kind of hug that says more than words ever could. 2 days later, Martin's attorney reached out with a proposal. If I dropped my claim to certain minor assets, he'd relinquish the cabin entirely. Vanessa and I barely needed a minute to decide. We accepted. When the papers were signed, I drove back to the cabin one last time. The lake was glassy, reflecting the fading light. I stood there in the doorway, breathing in the scent of cedar, and knew exactly what I had to do. The for sale sign went up the next morning. As the weeks passed, the divorce moved toward its conclusion. I felt lighter, stronger, no longer defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I'd fought to keep. The cabin sale would give me the financial cushion to rebuild, maybe even take that trip to Italy I'd dreamed about. Martin still glared at me in the courtroom, but his words no longer pierced. I had my truth, my dignity, and my future, and I wasn't giving them up for anyone. The final court date dawned gray and damp, as if the sky itself wanted to wash everything clean. I pulled my hair back, fastened the small silver locket my mother had given me, and drove to the courthouse with Vanessa riding shotgun. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish, a mix I'd come to associate with this chapter of my life. Martin was already there, seated beside his attorney. Chloe wasn't with him this time. The judge moved briskly through the docket until our case was called. Vanessa stood, her voice steady and clear. As she summarized the terms of the settlement, I would keep the cabin's proceeds, a fair share of our joint investments, and the house. Martin would retain his business holdings and the retirement account he'd fought to protect. It wasn't about getting everything. It was about walking away with enough to rebuild on my terms. When the gavel struck, a quiet wave rolled over me. Not relief exactly, not yet, but the first taste of freedom. Outside the courthouse, Martin approached me one last time. His expression was a strange mix of anger and resignation. "I hope you're happy," he said. I met his eyes. "I'm not happy about any of this, but I am at peace." He didn't reply. He just turned and walked away, his figure growing smaller in the drizzle until he was gone. Daniel found me a few minutes later. He was holding 2 coffees, one already going cold. "Thought you might need this," he said. "Thanks," I murmured, taking it. "I'm glad it's over," he added. "Maybe now we can just be family again in our own way." I smiled faintly. I'd like that. Over the next month, the cabin sold for more than we'd expected. I used part of the proceeds to renovate the house, new paint, refinished floors, a garden in the backyard. Harper came by with flowers, and we spent an afternoon planting roses, their petals opening in the warm sun. One evening, as twilight settled, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and just listened. The rustle of leaves, the distant hum of cars, the soft creak of the rocking chair beneath me. The quiet no longer felt empty. It felt earned. On the first weekend of summer, Daniel and I drove to the coast. We walked barefoot along the shoreline, the tide washing over our feet. "Do you ever think you'll forgive him?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness isn't about letting him off the hook. It's about not carrying his weight anymore. So, yes, maybe someday. Daniel nodded. "I think that's fair." Later that night, I opened my journal and wrote a single sentence. "I am not defined by what was done to me, but by how I rose after." I closed the book, turned off the light, and slept deeply for the first time in years. If you've been through betrayal, loss, or the kind of heartbreak that leaves you questioning your worth, I hope my story reminds you that you can take back your power. It won't happen all at once. It might be messy, even ugly at times, but step by step you will find your footing. And when you do, you'll see what I finally see now. Life after the storm isn't just possible, it can be beautiful. If this story spoke to you, I'd love for you to share it with someone who might need it. And if you want to hear more stories like this, you're welcome to join me here. Until next time, take care of your heart and keep walking forward.